Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Jerome Irving liked and stalkered for a long time. He started liking her when she was 20 years old, and he was 25. Now, Jerome was 40 and was 35. Even after 15 years, and still didn't want to marry him. This wasn't Jerome's fault. After the first year, Jerome asked Anne to marry him, but she said no. He was sad, but he didn't give up. Every Saturday night, he visited Anne's house. He walked with her after church and asked her to go to events like concerts and parties. Anne always said no, but Jerome kept asking. Anne's father, Isaac, liked Jerome, and was the plainest of his daughters, and no one else wanted to take Jerome's place. But Anne was strong-willed and didn't listen to anyone. She let things stay the same. 3 years later, Jerome asked her again, and she said no. Every year after that, Jerome asked her to marry him, and every year Anne said no. Over time, Jerome stopped minding. He thought that if he waited, Anne might say yes one day. Many things changed in their village. Anne's sisters all got married and moved away. Her parents passed away, and now owned the family farm. She was good at managing it, and had workers to help her, and her niece lived with her. Jerome still visited Anne every Saturday night. He talked about the farm and gave her advice. At 10 o'clock, he would say goodbye and go home. Anne stopped trying to make Jerome leave her alone. She even let him walk her home from events. People in the village laughed about old Jerome and Anne. They thought it was funny, but no one believed they would get married. Jerome didn't mind. He liked Anne and thought of her as a good friend. But Anne wished he would stop asking her to marry him every year. One night, Jerome asked Anne again. It was his 40th birthday, and she said no, like always. Jerome felt worried. They were both getting older. He didn't want to waste the 15 years he had spent waiting. As Jerome walked home, he decided he needed a new plan. When he reached the bridge, he had an idea. He laughed out loud. 2 boys sitting on the bridge laughed at him, but Jerome didn't care. Look, there goes old Jerome walking home after visiting and stalkered, said one boy. Why is he laughing? If I couldn't get a wife after trying for 15 years, I'd give up. The boy speaking was a Hamilton, and the Hamiltons were not known for patience. Jerome had a good farm and enough money, but he didn't have a home of his own. He lived with his older brother, who had a wife and children. Jerome was used to it and didn't mind. At 40, Jerome knew he couldn't waste time. That night, he made a plan. By the next day, he was ready to start. But it wasn't until the evening after that Anne heard the news. Anne's niece, Octavia, came into the house with a big smile on her face and her eyes twinkling. She had been talking with Sam Mitchell up the lane. Aunt Anne, I think you've lost your beau this time, said Octavia teasingly. It looks like he's finally doing what you told him to do. What do you mean? Asked Anne sharply. She was in the pantry counting eggs. Octavia's words made her lose count. Now I can't remember if I counted 6 or 7 dozen. I'll have to start again. Octavia, stop thinking about boys all the time. Listen to me, Octavia said with a grin. Jerome Irving was at the social at Cherry Valley last night, and he took Harriet Warren there. He drove her home, too. I don't believe it, said Anne quickly. She dropped an egg into the basket so hard that it broke. Oh, it's true, said Octavia. Sam Mitchell told me. He was there and saw it. Sam says Jerome looked very happy, dressed up nicely, and followed Harriet everywhere like a shadow. I guess you won't have to worry about him anymore, Aunt Anne. And calmed herself and gave a small laugh. Well, good for him. It's about time he gave someone else a try. Go change your dress for milking, Octavia. And don't spend so much time gossiping with Sam Mitchell. He talks too much. Young girls shouldn't be so cheeky. When Octavia left, Anne threw the broken eggshell out the window angrily. There's no fool like an old fool, she said. Jerome Irving is an idiot. Harriet Warren? She's young enough to be his daughter. And a Warren, too. I remember when Irvings wouldn't even walk on the same side of the road as a Warren. But I don't care. He can do whatever he wants. It will be nice not to have him hanging around anymore. And said she didn't care, but the next night, she felt lonely walking home from prayer meeting. Jerome wasn't there. She guessed he had gone to the Methodist prayer meeting in Cherry Valley instead. He's probably chasing after Harriet, she thought angrily. When Anne got home, she looked at herself in the mirror. She hadn't done this seriously for years. And had never been pretty. When she was young, people said she was awkward. She was tall and thin, with a long, pale face and dark hair. Her eyes were nice, big, and hazel with long lashes. They still looked nice, but now she had wrinkles around them. Her cheeks were hollow, and her mouth had lines around it. For the first time, Anne realized she was old. She wasn't young anymore. She was an old maid, and Harriet Warren was young and pretty. Anne's lips trembled. I'm a bigger fool than Jerome, she said angrily. When Saturday came, Jerome didn't show up. The spot on the porch where he always sat looked empty. Anne felt annoyed. She snapped at Octavia and even scolded the cat. What does it matter if Jerome never comes again, she thought. I could have married him any time if I wanted to. Later, at sunset, she saw Jerome driving past her gate in his new buggy. Harriet Warren was with him, sitting beside him. The buggy's shiny wheels flashed in the sunlight. Anne turned away quickly and went upstairs. She shut her window hard and slammed her door. She lay on her bed and said she had a headache. The people in Deep Meadows started teasing Anne. They made jokes about Jerome and Harriet and had to pretend to laugh along, even though their words hurt her deeply. She began to feel how lonely she really was. Jerome had been her only close friend, and now he was gone. 3 weeks later, Anne met Jerome and Harriet while walking to church with Octavia. Jerome was driving his buggy, looking neat and happy. Harriet, wearing a big fancy hat and veil, sat beside him. She smiled at Anne in a proud, unfriendly way. Jerome tipped his hat politely as they passed, but Harriet laughed loudly. Anne didn't look back, but her face turned red. Was Harriet laughing at her? Anne's heart hurt, and she felt angry. That night, she sat by her window for a long time. Jerome is gone, she thought. He let Harriet laugh at me, and he won't come back. but it doesn't matter. Still, she couldn't stop thinking, if I'd known he could act like this, I might not have been so sharp with him. For weeks later, Jerome came back. He showed up on Saturday night as if nothing had happened, and didn't expect to see him again, so she was surprised. She was standing on the porch when Jerome walked up. "Good evening," and he said calmly, and felt her anger rise. Jerome sat down in his usual spot like everything was normal. "I suppose you're on your way to see Harriet," and said sharply, "Why bother stopping here? You've hardly been around lately." Jerome looked pleased. He glanced at Anne, who was staring at the flowers in the garden, refusing to look at him. He could tell she was jealous. If she didn't care, she wouldn't have said that. "Maybe Harriet's expecting me, maybe not," Jerome said with a small smile. "I thought I'd stop here first. It's been a long time since we talked. But if you don't want me here, I can leave." And felt upset and couldn't calm down. Her emotions were all over the place, and she felt like she was about to cry or yell, but couldn't stop herself. "I guess it doesn't matter what I think," she said stiffly. "You don't care anyway. Harriet Warren is all you care about. Well, good luck with her." Jerome looked confused, though he was secretly happy. "I don't understand," and he said slowly, "You seem upset." "Upset? Me?" "Of course not, Mr. Irving," and replied coldly, "Old friends don't matter anymore. I'm sure your new friends will be just as good." "If this is about Harriet," Jerome said calmly, "I don't see why it should bother you. You've made it clear you don't want me. And that's fine, you had every right to. I was the fool for not giving up. But I won't bother you anymore. We can still be good friends, can't we? I'm just as much your friend as ever." Jerome's words, spoken kindly and matter-of-factly, hit and hard. She couldn't hold back her feelings any longer. Suddenly, she burst into tears and sat down. Jerome's hat and cane went flying as he rushed to her side. He sat next to her, grabbed her hand, and put his arm around her. "Anne, do you care about me after all? Tell me," and sobbed, "Why should it matter to you if I do? It hasn't seemed to before." And Jerome said firmly, "I've come after you for 15 years. It's always been you. I don't care about Harriet Warren or anyone else. I just want you. That's the truth." And believed him. She cried on Jerome's shoulder, which made her feel much better. Later, Octavia quietly came up the steps. What she saw made her stop in shock. When she realized what was happening, she ran off, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. She bumped into Sam Mitchell in the yard. "Goodness, Tavy, what's wrong?" Sam asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Octavia leaned against the wall, laughing. "Oh, Sam," she said, gasping for air. "Jerome Irving and Aunt Anne are on the porch in the dark." He had his arm around her and was kissing her. "They didn't even see me." Sam let out a loud whistle and burst into laughter. His laughter was so loud it reached the porch where Anne and Jerome were sitting. But they didn't notice, and even if they had, they wouldn't have cared. They were too happy. That fall, there was a wedding, and Stockard became the bride. After they were married, Jerome told Anne the truth about his plan, and she forgave him. But wasn't it mean to Harriet? Anne asked. You spent time with her and then left her. Don't you think that was wrong? Jerome smiled. Not really, he said. You see, Harriet is engaged to a man out west. It's not public yet, but I knew about it. That's why I chose her. I figured she wouldn't mind a little flirting, even with an old man like me. Harriet's that kind of girl. And I decided that if this plan didn't work, I'd give up for good. But it worked, didn't it, Anne? It sure did, Anne said. It was a sneaky thing to do, Jerome, but maybe it was for the best. I wouldn't have realized how much I cared about you otherwise. I was so upset. Poor Octavia could tell you how grumpy I was. How did you even come up with such a plan? I had to do something, Jerome said with a grin. I'd spent 15 years courting you with no results. I don't know how the idea came to me. Maybe it was inspiration. But I did what I set out to do. I got you.